Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We're in the process of continuing to allow quite a few folks who've registered for this annual gathering with our governor, Governor Tom Wolf. So we'll just give it a moment or so before we begin officially. Okay, again, good afternoon. My name is Rob Wonderling, and I really do have the distinct pleasure and honor to serve all of you in my role as the president and CEO of your Chamber of Commerce for Greater Philadelphia. And we're expecting several hundred individuals to join us this afternoon for our rite of a new year, if you will, where we spend time with our governor of our Commonwealth in an interview format with the estimable Matt O'Donnell from 6ABC. But as we were saying before we went live, the advantage of doing this type of activity virtually is it does enable many, many more individuals to participate in today's activity. Before we go a step further, I really would like to thank Governor Tom Wolf and his administration for first his public service and his leadership of our Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And second, from the outset, from the beginning of his first term as governor to today, we really have enjoyed a very strong working collaborative relationship with the governor and his team, our membership through the Chamber of Commerce of Greater Philadelphia, and our business community throughout southeastern Pennsylvania. So Governor, we really do appreciate your leadership and appreciate you taking time to join us today. As the screen would suggest, and as all things in person or virtual with our Chamber of Commerce, everything could not be executed or convened without the generous support of our members. And so in particular, I'd really like to highlight our title sponsors, co-sponsors, and supporting sponsors for today's activity. First, in our title sponsors, we have three tremendous chamber and business and civic leaders, individuals that are active on our board of directors, active in civic affairs and throughout our community. The first is 15 to Know, led by Mike Dershowitz, a serial entrepreneur, member of our board of directors. You'll be hearing from Mike at one point during our program. And as the name would suggest, 15 minutes to know the results of your rapid PCR test. And Mike has been with us in our private-public partnership with Governor Wolf and his team from day one, and helping to provide much needed COVID-19 testing infrastructure, and to date has deployed testing sites throughout the Commonwealth that is currently generating approximately 5,000 COVID-19 rapid PCR tests, antibody tests per day. So Mike, thanks for your leadership. Also joining us today is Travis Rhodes. Travis leads the market, serves as the market leader and president for BB&T, now Truist, which in part is southeastern Pennsylvania, but also includes the Lehigh Valley as well. Travis became a member of our business community just a short amount of time ago, but boy, has he really made an impact through his own personal commitment to inclusive growth and issues around equity to all neighborhoods and communities throughout our market area and through the work of his fine institution. Travis has been actively engaged in organizations with his philanthropy, with Children's Hospital, Esperanza, and supports our very own neighborhood social impact programs through the Roadmap for Growth. And then finally, Stratted Ronan, led by its chair, Bill Sasso. Where to begin with Bill as a business and civic leader, past chairman of our Chamber of Commerce and currently leads our privately funded business attraction efforts, Select Greater Philadelphia. But it doesn't matter what the issue is, large or small, complex or simple, you can count on Bill Sasso, his leadership and those of his Stradley colleagues to lend a hand to assist and result always in something good in an outcome. We have several other co-sponsors that are assisting us for today's event, 6ABC, Independence Blue Cross, and PICO. And then finally, our supporting sponsors, the African American Chamber of Commerce, the General Builders Contractors Association, Montco Community College, and Pfizer. So chamber members, future chamber members, guests, this is going to be a whirlwind of Q&A led by Matt O'Donnell, as I mentioned earlier. But allow me at this point in time to introduce one of our key co-sponsors for today's event from the Stradley Ronan law firm, Bill Sasso. Bill, all yours.
Thank you, Rob. I really appreciate that. I love being involved in this particular program because it gives me an opportunity to acknowledge a friend, a governor, someone who has done so much for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Whether you think of him as a businessman or a governor, the one consistent theme that has run through his entire life is that he helps those who are less fortunate than he is. I remember when he first came into office and he was faced with an education budget that had been cut by over $1 billion by his predecessor. And the net result of that was teacher layoffs, cuts to programs, including pre-K, tutoring, and larger class sizes. He immediately restored that budget, and he continues to improve it. And that's led to improved graduation rates, more children in pre-K, and just an altogether better education system in the Commonwealth. He's also been involved in expanding Medicaid to a significant degree, providing quality and affordable health care to hundreds of thousands of Pennsylvanians. And he's also been involved in getting our seniors the opportunity to age in their homes and make Pennsylvania a national leader in fighting the various afflictions that beset those elder Pennsylvanians. He's also been a leader in the nationwide fight against the heroin and opioid epidemic. And he's bringing people to task for their responsibility in expanding that epidemic. Tom works to grow the economy as well, especially during this crisis that we're in right now. I can't help but reflect on the fact that in 2009, 2010, when the business that he had sold was running into difficulties and there was the prospect of bankruptcy and laying off of employees, Tom abandoned the gubernatorial campaign that he was considering at that time in order to bring that company back to life. And he did that because he's a turnaround guy, as well as being an excellent businessman. And I can't help but think that that's exactly what the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania needs today in this crisis, a turnaround guy. And that's what Tom has proven to be. He's had to fight this pandemic on so many different fronts, including it's really startling when you consider how many Pennsylvanians are going hungry because of this pandemic. And Tom extended the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, also known as SNAP, and he increased the allotments to that program, and he's providing hundreds of thousands of meals for people in the Commonwealth that need that. And there are quite a few of them. And he's done that in partnership with organizations like the United Way and the Salvation Army. He's also worked on student loan abatement for Commonwealth kids. And he's been especially helpful in an area that I'm interested in, healthcare. I happen to chair the board of a community health system, and I serve on the board of Independence Blue Cross. And It's no secret that our healthcare institutions, our hospitals, our health systems are suffering greatly during this crisis. People are overworked. The hospitals are running into financial difficulties because of what's happening. And Tom answered that challenge by passing the Pennsylvania Emergency Hospital Loan Program, which involved over $450 million to the institutions that need it. He's also doing the same thing with small business, providing millions, tens of millions of dollars of assistance in that area as well. So I am very pleased to have Tom with us today. I know I'm going over my allotted time to introduce him, but I think the world of this guy, and so thankful that we have him in this particular crisis. And so thankful, by the way, that we have Matt O'Donnell with us again. I'm also a big fan of Matt. For those of you who don't know, he's a graduate of our own University of Delaware. He left us to work in Binghamton and Syracuse, but came back to Channel 6 in December of 1996 and worked his way up to be now the morning anchor, where he anchors Channel 6 News from 4 a.m. to 7 a.m. That's right, folks. 4 a.m. He's in the saddle. He's providing us with information. And I'm just stunned that he's as bright-eyed and bushy-tailed as he is right now, where he's been on the job for over 12 hours. Matt's a real Renaissance man as well. For those of you who don't know it, he joined the Air Force National Guard after 2001. And that crisis, he's flown with the Blue Angels, something that I'm too afraid to do. He's also a musician, plays drums in his band. He has a rock band, and he's a pretty damn good golfer. And I have to say, I admire the fact that he uses that talent to raise money for charities at tournament golf at golf outings for charities. I also like to point out the fact that he is the moderator of one of my favorite programs, along with Tamala Harris, Inside Stories, Sunday morning at 11:30. How's that for a commercial? If you want to know what's going on in the region, and you want to see a moderator who's incredibly adept interviewing usually four panelists who are in the know in this particular region, tune into that show. Matt is great. And Matt, the floor is now yours.
Bill, thanks so much for that warm welcome. I really appreciate it. And good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see you, although virtually. This is the way we're going to do it. We have a great program for you. Governor Tom Wolf, thanks so much for joining us once again. And how are you doing this afternoon?
I'm fine. And Matt, I think you and I would both agree that anytime Bill Sasso wants to go overtime on those introductions, he should feel free to do that. Don't you think that's fair?
I could have gone a couple hours, Governor, on you. Yeah. All of it good.
Yeah,
thank you so much. So it's an honor to bring this conversation to the Greater Philadelphia Chamber of Commerce. Thanks once again for entrusting me to moderate this important event. Governor Wolf, just a few reminders for people before we begin. We encourage you to submit questions in the chat box of this Zoom call, and make sure when you do that to select everyone so that we see them. Make sure you include your name and your company. In case we select your question, we'd like to acknowledge you. All of you are muted, so you can bang pots and pans and scream and yell. You're not going to interrupt this conversation, so go nuts. And finally, this program is being recorded for future viewing in case you'd like to watch it again, or if someone you know would like to see it who cannot join us right now. Governor Wolf, Dr. Rachel Levine is already headed to Washington working with the Biden administration ahead of her confirmation hearings. You announced late last week that you'll nominate Allison Beam to replace Levine as Health Secretary and Dr. Wendy Braun to replace Levine as Physician General. People who don't know, Dr. Levine was doing two jobs at once.
For the price of one. For the price of one.
Yes, exactly. Governor, how might this leadership change the approach or direction in how the state is handling the pandemic or not?
This should be a seamless handoff. About 3 months ago, I'm now within 2 years of the end of my term of office. And so this is a time when senior officials in the state administration start accepting other positions. So I mean, I knew that was coming. So I went around to each and every one of the cabinet officials and said, you know, what are your career plans and what is the succession plan if and when you leave or get hit by the beer truck, whatever. And it turned out there were only a very few who said, you know, if something were to come up, they would be interested in leaving. And one of them was Rachel Levine. She said there are 2 positions in the federal government that if she were offered either one of those, she would go. And one of them was the one she was accepted. She accepted, which is Deputy Secretary of Health, Human Services, basically the Secretary of Health. So it's a bittersweet thing. I mean, it's nice that we're going to have her recognized like this, and that we'll have a connection in Washington. But I knew this was coming, and so we both sat down and worked out what the succession plan would be. And Allison Beam has been the Deputy Chief of Staff, and her area was the Health Hub. So she's been doing this for 2 years now. Before that, she was in the insurance department, and I think before that has worked with, you know, Independence Blue Cross. So she knows this space really well. She has been completely involved in the processes that we put into place so far. And so there really should be, the transition should be seamless. And I'm looking forward to her work. She has been great as a Deputy Chief of Staff. And as I say, the only real difference is we now have a really good contact in Washington, D.C.
That is true. We wish her the best of luck. Real briefly, on a personal level, Governor, you tested positive for the coronavirus on December 8th. It seems like it was at the tail end of an infection because a few days afterwards, you tested negative. You were asymptomatic. You quarantined anyway. Given that we're more than a month since then, how is your health? And is there anything that you want to share with your bout with the virus?
Yeah, no, I feel great. I mean, I feel guilty that I didn't maybe feel more of it, but no, I feel great. My wife feels great. We had a very quarantined holiday season, but other than that, I'm in good shape.
All right. Well, that's good to hear.
except for the fact that I'm 72 years old. Other than that, I'm fine.
You don't look a day older than 51.
Yeah, right.
So for this next question, I want you to think about and talk about what the biggest catalysts for getting to the end of the pandemic in the state will be, and what are the biggest roadblocks. But to do that, I also want to bring in Mike Dershowitz, who is the CEO and founder of 15 to Know, which is a COVID testing site that many of you probably have experienced already, and also a tri-title sponsor. And Mr. Dershowitz has a question for you, Governor, about vaccinations.
Thank you, Matt. Governor, thank you again for all the great work you're doing to navigate the Commonwealth through the pandemic. Obviously, with the vaccines now here in some form, most of us are really wondering when we're going to get our shot. 15 to Know has started its limited vaccination program. So, maybe you can tell us from your perspective, how is the rollout of the COVID-19 vaccination going? And, what's your timeline for getting Pennsylvania vaccinated?
Those are great questions. First of all, Mike, I want to say thank you to you because we went through the same thing. I mean, to a certain extent still are with testing. Back in March, when this whole pandemic started, we could maybe in Pennsylvania do 100 or so tests a day. Yesterday, we did over 50,000 PCR tests and 15,000 antigen tests. And you're a big part of that because you're helping to organize this and make sure the state's getting all this done. Well, we have the same challenge with the vaccines. I mean, part of it is figuring out how we do the logistics here in Pennsylvania. Part of it is just getting access to the vaccines. As of yesterday, I guess we've had about 1 million, or maybe this was Friday, about 1 million vaccines of both Pfizer and Moderna, and both of those require 2 injections. So, we have 13 million Pennsylvanians, and that's enough to get 500,000 into the arms of people. We don't do the injections until after the vaccines arrive, so we're actually running at about 67% injection rate. So it's sort of, you and I were talking earlier. I said, sort of like trying to get tickets to a Springsteen concert. Did I just date myself? I mean, maybe I'm.
You did, but we're all going with it. It's okay.
Yeah, that would have been hard. Anyway, so it's never fast enough. I have not gotten a vaccine yet. I don't want to butt in line. I'm going to get one as soon as I can, and my wife the same thing. But right now, the supply is the issue. I think once the supply opens up, I'm sure we'll find some gaps in our logistics system. And as we did with testing, we'll learn how to do it better and better. We'll get better with each passing day. But the idea, I think, is that the Biden administration is using the Defense Production Act to actually increase the supply. The goal is to have 100 million vaccines within the first 100 days of his administration. We had a little bit of an issue with, I think, some overpromising in that regard in back before the end of December. So I think it's going to be what we hope for the best and hope that things come out. But if that happens, I know we're going to see an exponential increase in the supply. We're going to have to make sure that our logistics systems in Pennsylvania are capable of taking all that. We have about between 3 and 4 million people in our 1A category. Last week, we moved from 75 and older to 65 and older. Anybody 16 and older with underlying conditions, and then obviously people, healthcare workers, frontline healthcare workers, people working in long-term care facilities, nursing homes, patients and staff. So I think we're doing this in a fair way. The goal is to do it as efficiently as we possibly can, and there will never come a time. The only thing I can probably guarantee is there will never come a time where everybody in Pennsylvania is positively, absolutely pleased with the way we're doing this. We will continue to do our best, make the system, bring in any improvements. I was talking with Rob Wonderling just earlier. We want to work with the state chamber, Philadelphia chamber, and other business organizations to make sure that we're all taking all the expertise we can possibly take, including from folks like you, Mike, who are doing this kind of thing and know what the supply lines ought to be, how they ought to work. So I'm pledging you that we will continue to do whatever we can. Right now, we are nowhere near where we need to be.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Mike.
Governor.
And Governor, you agree with Dr. Fauci that the fall is kind of like around the end game in terms of getting normalcy back?
I really hope it's sooner than that. I mean, if we get the vaccines out in a really good way and targeted, I would hope that it's before we get to the fall. I certainly wouldn't want to argue with anything that Dr. Fauci says, but I hope we can figure out a way to do this sooner. Right now, we have 2 vaccines that have been approved through emergency authorization. The hope is Johnson & Johnson comes on board sometime in February, and there are other companies that are also working right now on vaccines, and so. The hope is that and who knows with the Defense Production Act how many more might come online and how much more supply might come online. So the hope is that we get back to whatever the new normal is well before the fall. That's what I would hope. I don't know, Mike, you have any thoughts on that?
I think it's exactly right. I think the logistics systems are there, from our own vaccination tests. As I was joking, we call it the poke and roll. You really can poke, make them roll to their spot, wait their 15, 30 minutes, and then go. With technology mediation, you can speed it up even faster. We're seeing it happen in under 120 seconds per person. So it can be done. I think that both the public sector and the private sector can work together to get it done and get it done fast, if we have the supply. So we're going to be there when it happens, and we're going to be ready. If one thing I think is there isn't a good thing to the vaccine being delayed, but I think it now gives everybody more time to get their systems in place and be ready, so that when that shipment comes in, like ours did today, they're out in the arms 2 days later.
A lot of people are anxious. Thanks again, Mike, for your question. A little bit of Harrisburg politics for you, Governor Wolf. Both houses of the General Assembly are more solidly controlled by Republicans this session. We've seen the antagonism in Washington kind of spill over into Pennsylvania with some GOP lawmakers promoting the election fraud conspiracy. There was the efforts to deny an elected state Senate Democrat from being seated. What impact do you think all this will have as you try to work with Republicans this year?
Well, hey, whenever you come out of a hotly contested, competitive contest, you always have the room for sort of a spillover of some intense passions. My hope is that we can get back to doing business. I mean, yeah, we are on different teams, and sometimes that can lead to some heated passions. But in the end, we're all trying to do the same thing, and that's making Pennsylvania a better place. I think one of the tragic things of the past couple of weeks is that sometimes it looks like maybe we've lost our dedication to democracy, and I don't think that's sustainable. And I think what's going to happen is people are going to get back to saying, okay, let's recognize we're in a competitive sport here, and we just had a big contest, and some of us won, some of us lost, and let's move on to do the things that we were elected to do. The contest is not the issue. It's making decisions, doing good public policies, and doing them in the right way, having arguments and disagreements and all that kind of stuff, but doing it in a democratic way. So I'm hoping that we get through the passion, the intense partisanship, and actually get back to business. So much of my 6 years now in Harrisburg been marked by actually working together across the aisle. Some of it's been, divisive. Some of it we've had some intense conversations, but for the most part, I think we've been able to get a lot of good things done. Bill talked about some of those in his introduction. So I'm hoping we get back to that as quickly as possible.
Governor, the chamber released its recharge and recover report in September, and this is to seek to help the Philadelphia region out of the pandemic, and hopes for an economic boom to actually take place once that happens. And as you know, it talks in the report about creating and trading jobs of the future, making the region a cell and gene therapy hub, better internet connectivity, more investment in Black and brown businesses. From this report and from the advice you're getting from the chamber, what are the things that you're gleaning from? What are the things that you really like?
Well, I like a lot of it. Actually, I'm part of this process. The state and the Philly Chamber have worked closely together on this. So I think it's a really good report. The only thing I keep pointing out is, and again, this is, when I was in business, I had major facility in Massachusetts, major facility in Georgia, and I think customers in 40 some states. But we were headquartered in Pennsylvania. So I had a pretty good perspective on how different states were operating. And I always thought Pennsylvania was a really remarkable place to do business. And I think what this report suggests is that we build on those strengths. The life sciences business should do really, really well, especially in the Southeast, given the universities that we have here, given the infrastructure, the experts, the talents, the skills we have. And when we marry that to the additional issue of making sure that we expand the pool of talent that we appeal to here with our equity and diversity, and reaching out and saying, let's do a better job in those regards. I think Pennsylvania can take its natural virtues and actually bring them into much better use. So I think they're doing that. I appreciate being part of this, and will continue to work as hard as I can to make sure that we're successful, because if the Philadelphia Area Chamber of Commerce is successful in this, that's a big plug for Pennsylvania, and it's going to pull Pennsylvania along in so many different ways. So I think the recommendations there are outstanding, and I support them.
When it comes to jobs and keeping brighter minds in the state of Pennsylvania, I'd like to turn to Sia McCabe, who is a population health specialist with Independence Blue Cross and a member of the Young Professionals Council on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee of the Chamber's board. Ms. McCabe, you have the question.
Yes, thank you, Governor Wolf. I want to echo all the thanks that we've heard this afternoon for the work that you're doing, and just thank you for your time this afternoon as well. But I did want to know, have you been thinking, or are you thinking about young professional retention in the wake of the pandemic, when remote work has proven to be effective?
Yeah, we're in a couple different ways. I think the brain drain has been a big problem for Pennsylvania for a long time. I think back even when Rob was in the state Senate, that was something that everybody, Republicans and Democrats, were just really concerned about. As someone who went all around the world, I was in the Peace Corps in India, graduate programs in Europe and then finally PhD in Boston. I came back to Pennsylvania. I think Pennsylvania is a remarkable place. It saddens me when too many other back I was young at one point. Too many other young professionals don't see the talent pool here or the opportunities here. So I'm doing a couple of things. First of all, I think we need to recognize that the workplace has to be different. So when it comes to the public sector, we're doing everything we can to try to reach out to younger professionals to say, think about a career in public service, think about a career working for the state. And we recognize it's more than just recruiting it, saying here's a salary, here's a place. We got to make our offices different. We've got to have more. And it's not just younger workers. I think people prefer a lot of people prefer telecommuting, and it turns out we've learned a lot at the state in terms of how to make this work. You need fewer parking spaces, more people telecommute. People like working at home when they can. Not every job is a telecommuting job, but there are lots that are. And we could you pay for fewer square feet of office space. So there are a lot of things we can learn here. I'm also doing things to say, and this is very Pennsylvania centric, but a scholarship program that takes the form of, say, a forgivable loan. And the only thing you have to do to have that student loan forgiven is stay in Pennsylvania. I guess I'm tired of having our tax dollars spent on scholarships or tuition reductions in state universities and then having them go with the education they got here and enrich the states like California and Texas and Washington or New York or Massachusetts. I want them to enrich this state. If they don't want to stay in Pennsylvania, fine, but then the student loan they have to pay back. Otherwise, it's forgivable loan that they don't have to pay. It's basically a grant. And so those are the kinds of things I think we can do. And again, I think we also need to make sure that we're doing everything we can to promote Pennsylvania. Philadelphia is a really nice place to be. Pittsburgh is a really nice place. Actually, Harrisburg is a really nice place to be. And I think we need to be a little bolder about making that case. Pennsylvania has world-class cities. It has some of the greatest scenery in the world. And I love New England, but you go across Route 6 up in the north, I don't think there's a prettier spot in the world than that drive. We have great universities. The history of the United States has gone through Pennsylvania. So there's so many things that we have, and for a long time we were a dominant state in the country. I think we just need to do a better job of recognizing our own greatness, and that alone will help us recapture some of the things that we're talking about here, and help retain a lot of bright young professionals who now think they have to leave Pennsylvania to seek a good career. We need to make the point in a much better way that actually you can do a lot of good things right here in Pennsylvania.
Absolutely.
Thank you for your question. Governor Wolf, I spoke with Senator Pat Toomey a few weeks back about President Biden's proposal to increase taxes on wealthier Americans. He said it's a bad idea to raise taxes during a pandemic. And I know a lot of members of the chamber are curious as to whether or not you're going to be able to hold the line on state taxes. What can you tell them about that?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I think you want to be careful about taking away anybody's ability to consume or invest during an economic recession. So I think that's sort of a traditional point of view. On the other hand, the Pennsylvania, like most every other local municipality and even school districts all around the country, are facing all kinds of budget challenges. The hope is that the federal government can help with that. The first round of CARES Act funding did that, and it helped places like Pennsylvania actually address needs that would have been unmet had we not had the help from the federal government. And it looks like the $800 and some billion that the President Trump signed back in December, and the hope is that there's more coming from the Biden administration, that will also help address the needs of the Commonwealth. Because I think Senator Toomey is right. You got to be careful about doing anything to make people more reluctant to invest or consume. On the other hand, if the net effect is an austerity that leads you to reduce the state investment in things that are really necessary, education, infrastructure, things like that, then you're being penny wise and dollar foolish. I mean, you might be able to balance your budget, but you're balancing it on the backs of an economy that you're just taking away the ability to recover. One of the things that was interesting about the first round of CARES Act funding back in the spring was, if you recall, the third quarter, the bounce back was pretty dramatic. I think on an annualized basis, it was over 30% growth rate. And that happened because I think of the CARES Act funding, that it was massive. Yes, there was a lot of borrowing, and that upsets people who want to always keep your budget in balance. But my experience in business was, if you had an investment that could actually pay a dividend, that you could actually improve your productivity or your net profit, even if you had to borrow to make that investment, you did it, especially because if the return was greater than the borrowing costs. And I think what we saw with the first round of CARES Act funding was the investment that the federal government made with the borrowing at that point allowed us to get through the worst part of that spring upsurge and allowed us to recover very quickly. And to the extent this next round allows us to do the same thing, then I think that's going to help us recover. So I would argue that, Senator Toomey, there are certain times when you need to suspend some of the I think the old conventional wisdom of economics, and say, okay, here's a special time, and if we adhere to the sort of let's just tighten our belts, we might end up in a worse place than if we actually try to do what the conservative government actually did back in the United States back in the spring.
Governor, you spoke about last year's budgetary process. It was challenging, to say the least, and it may even be more so this coming budget session. And along those lines, more specific with the state budget, I'd like to bring in Travis Rhodes, who is the regional president of BB&T, which is now Truist, and a tri-title sponsor. Mr. Rhodes, you have the floor.
Thank you, Matt. Governor, thank you for being here. You touched on this a little bit already, but an area of critical importance is how COVID has impacted tax receipts at the state level and the increased costs associated with the pandemic. How's the state handling managing this budgetary climate in light of the political divide at the federal level around funding state budgetary shortfalls? And if you could pull out your crystal ball, what do you see on the horizon?
That's a great question. Now, let me just say, Travis, being the geek that I am, I actually I have a spreadsheet that I put in every day by category what revenues are and how they are for against estimate. And if you look at this past calendar year, and we're on a fiscal year, July 1st to June 30th, so you have 2 fiscal years in this one calendar year. The real challenge was in fiscal year that ended June 30th, 2020. And that was because we actually put off personal income tax filings from that fiscal year into the new fiscal year, and we postponed some of the corporate receipts filings into this fiscal year. So we ended up with a $3-point-something billion deficit in 2020. But it turns out that was a timing issue, because the personal income tax receipts and the actually corporate income tax receipts were actually higher than expected. And that's partially, if you think about it, makes sense, because those receipts were based on economic activity of calendar year 2019, which is pretty good. So in this fiscal year, the first half of this fiscal year has actually been pretty good, because the personal income tax, corporate net income tax receipts were still based a lot on estimates now that were based on performance in 2019. The challenge for all of us is going to come in the year that we're starting right now, because January, this calendar year receipts in this fiscal year, the last 6 months of this fiscal year, based on economic activity for the most part in the personal income tax and the corporate income tax area on calendar year 2020, which was really tough, especially the second quarter. I think it's too early to tell. The corporate taxes are coming in fairly strong, but January is not a big month for that. The estimates, it's hard to tell because personal income tax estimates are based on the prior year to a certain extent. And there's always some innate conservatism that goes into that. And when you get into the first quarter payment, the January payment, a lot of people pay their estimate in December rather than January, so they get an additional deduction. So all those things make sort of predictions of what's going to happen a little tough. But I think everybody expects the 2021-2022 budget, which is due by June 30th of this year, that starts July 1st of 2021. That's going to be a tough one. And it depends a little bit on not a little bit, a lot on what the federal government does. And I think the federal government does have seems to indicate a willingness to actually help states. Even in this last CARES Act round of funding, the $800 to $900 billion did not have the same non-supplantation clause in it that the first round did back in the spring. So there's a recognition that state and local governments are challenged. Local governments and school districts tend to have a different fiscal year. I think most municipalities and counties are on I think a calendar year. So they've already started to face the problem, and there's already some real anxiety about how they're going to make ends meet. So I think there's real interest and support for the federal government doing something, and I'm hoping that helps us as we look at this next fiscal year. And I think that again, if the federal government does what it looks like it's going to do in terms of investing in this deficit financing, that the same thing will happen that happened after the spring, that we'll have a faster bounce back. As you know from your banking, residential construction has been very strong. Construction is even strong right now. Mike says he has lineups outside his testing sites from construction folks trying to get their tests so to be able to go back to work. So I think we should have a strong bounce back, and that would make moving forward really good. But we have some one-time challenges in this budget, and a lot of it is riding on what the federal government does.
Travis, thanks for your question.
Thank you.
We're going to take some questions from the audience, Governor. Our first one's from Charmaine Matlock-Turner from the Urban Affairs Coalition, and also, of course, a panelist on Inside Story on 6ABC. Charmaine asks, how do you and your policies help us to end racism in our communities?
Charmaine, that's a great question. And let me point out that I think there has been a lot of happy talk about diversity and inclusion and those kinds of things. I think what we've got to recognize is that the lack of inclusion, the lack of diversity, the existence of systemic discrimination of any form is really something that hampers our entire economy. Again, when I was in business, if I practiced that kind of exclusion and ended up where everybody in senior management or in the company looked like me, I would have a fairly narrow talent pool. And it's why businesses have really been at the forefront of diversity and inclusion, because they recognize that it's actually very practically smart. So the state is pushing this on a number of fronts. As you know, criminal justice reform has been a top of mind thing for my administration, and that is gaining bipartisan support. One of the issues has been the school to prison pipeline. We have reduced, and this started really with my predecessor, a Republican governor, that I think the state prison population has gone down by 15,000, and 80% of the prison population reduction has been 80% non-white. So we're actually making some headway there. We have a long way to go, but as long as any company, any organization, any commonwealth, any nation is not free of the stain of discrimination. We hurt ourselves and our future prospects for growth. When we exclude anybody, we keep we exclude or we reduce by that person we have excluded the possibility that we might get a cure for a disease that affects somebody we love, or a killer app, or a new product or service, or a new source of jobs. We don't do ourselves any favor. And I think one of the things that we've learned from the conversations, debates, and arguments we've had starting this summer was that we really need to redouble our efforts and do a much better job of dismantling systemic racism.
Our next question, Governor, is from Renee Hughes from Philadelphia OIC, and she wants to know about telecommuting. And as you know, Philadelphia, Allentown, Pittsburgh, these cities were built for people to go in and out and work and take public transit and go to the restaurants and go to the shops. And that's just not happening during this pandemic. How do we fix that? How do we bring things back? And do we have any ways of forming new ideas what it's like to have a city, a vibrant city in a post-pandemic world?
Yeah, that's a great question, Renee. Here's my view of that. Before the pandemic, we were already starting to. I mean, people would text each other even if you're sitting across from them at the dinner table. So we were starting to use electronics more. We've gotten more adept at things like Zoom, and I bet moving forward, we were talking about this earlier, that things like this might actually be more amenable, might be better on Zoom than actually bringing people together in auditoriums. On the other hand, people still we're all social animals. We still like getting together. And so I think the form of a city is actually in the not too long run going to be enhanced. So we have Zoom, we have electronic ways of communicating with each other, meeting with each other. But that's just one more way we can interact. It doesn't exclude the things we also really like, which is interacting in person, going to restaurants, being able to walk out of your home or apartment in Philadelphia and walk to a store, walk to a theater. I think that's going to come back. I think the pandemic has made it a little hard because we're afraid of infecting each other. But once that goes away with the vaccines, I think what we're learning from things like telecommuting and zooming, is that a verb now? By the way, by
Yes.
using Zoom, is that we can now do that in addition to the things we like to do, because we're still going to like to walk, we're still going to like to interact with people, we're still going to like to go to places in person. This is just one way that augments all the other things. So I think the form of the city actually is here for the long. I think people really like the city, so I think we'll bounce back in a lot of ways. But one of the ways is we'll see cities maybe even have a new relevance.
That would be great. Speaking of Zooming, which is a verb, we know that many of Pennsylvania's state universities are in financial trouble, not all, but some. We know local schools have been having a lot of trouble with teachers trying to educate children remotely. A large number of students may be falling behind as we speak. Parents, administrators, and teachers have clashed over how to operate, whether to do hybrid, whether to bring the kids back. What needs to be done to reboot the state's education system?
Well, a couple of things. Let me start with higher education. I mean, I think colleges and universities are struggling partially because there's a demographic trough. So and private and public institutions are struggling with this. And this could be a good thing. I mean, it has obvious financial ramifications, but it's also forcing every college and university to think about maybe how they make themselves more relevant to the needs of a 21st century student. And so the PASHE system in particular, because this is the state system, is looking for ways to actually maybe change their curriculum, make sure that they're doing everything they can to, first of all, control costs, obviously, but also to make sure that they are reaching out to businesses and say, what are the skills and talents and certifications you need that an English major may not be presenting to you right now. And I think we're learning some really interesting things there. I mentioned, I think, Sia earlier, the scholarship program. I think one of the things we've got to do is make post-secondary education of whatever sort more accessible, more affordable. And we cannot afford to have students graduating from whatever they're doing, whatever they're learning, whatever certification they're getting, with mounds of student debt. That's just not going to be helpful to anybody. Obviously not to the student or the family, but certainly it's also not helpful for the rest of us. So we're trying to work on this reinvention process in a way that makes our higher education system work. As to the second, early childhood and second primary and secondary education system, I think that is an area that you know, obviously you can't throw money at any problem and hope to get to a good outcome, but you can't keep taking money away from a problem either and expect to get to a good place. So I think one of the things that we need to do is take a look at the fair funding formula, that you know, all the new dollars that, as you mentioned and as Bill mentioned, has gone out for education in Pennsylvania since I've been governor, have gone out according to the fair funding formula. That hasn't taken us anywhere near close to where we need to get us, so that schools, rural and urban, in poor areas of Pennsylvania, they're just not getting everything that they ought to get. We have some of the greatest public schools in the world here in Pennsylvania, but we also have some that are just really underfunded. So I think we need to continue to work for ways to make sure that our schools are doing everything they should to educate kids, but we also need to make sure that we're not being stupid in terms of underfunding schools just because, you know, you happen to have a school building in the wrong zip code. The final thing is you mentioned the learning gap, that learning remotely really isn't the same thing as learning in person. And there've been a lot of kids who have fallen behind because they haven't been able to go to schools. Teachers are concerned about getting infected. Doesn't seem like younger kids, especially middle school and younger, have been that hard hit by this disease. But their teachers are, the staff members who have to keep those schools open are, and that's created some problems. But whatever the merits of those arguments, I think there's universal agreement that to the extent students have not been able to go to school has led to a learning gap that we're all going to pay for if we don't quickly figure out how to get our kids back into the classroom, get back to learning. So we need to do that quickly. I think the confidence is only going to come from the vaccine. Parents already have expressed concerns about, you can say all you want about whether kids are more susceptible or not. Back in the spring, when parents were deciding what courses their kids would take when they went back to school, we had a huge increase in cyber options. Parents looking at that just so they wouldn't have to have their kids in school. So we've got to address that. I think the vaccine is going to take us a long way to doing that, but then we've got to figure out, okay, how do we recover so that we haven't basically condemned a whole generation of school kids to basically being a year at least behind in their studies.
Another question from Shane Dowd, who is at Philadelphia International Airport. He's worried about mass transit. As you know, a SEPTA line goes directly into Philadelphia International Airport to bring travelers over there. And Governor, you know that mass transit's not a self-sustaining operation. It needs support. And right now it's just not getting the revenue at all that it normally sees. What needs to happen with mass transit, and what are your plans in the near future? Well,
the two things. First of all, I think there is an immediate problem in Pennsylvania. Back in 2007, I think it was Act 44, figured out that funding for mass transit would come from basically increased transfers from the Turnpike Commission. And the Turnpike Commission was able to do that only by increasing tolls every year, which is getting to the point where you can't really do that anymore. I think next year or the year after we run out on that option. So there's a bipartisan recognition that we've got to fix this. And I think the state we'll come up with an alternative. I have some suggestions. I'm sure the General Assembly has some too, and we'll figure that out. The second thing is there's a long-term issue when it comes to funding for infrastructure in general, transportation, for mass transit, highways, bridges, whatever. That has come a little bit from things like, motor registration fees and licensing fees and things like that. But the bulk of it has come from a fuel tax on diesel and gasoline. Here's the problem: as cars become more fuel efficient, you use less gasoline, less diesel. And when you do that, there's less money coming into the state to pay for bridges and roads. And with all if you really look at the future, a lot more people are driving all electric cars. They don't use any fuel, any fossil fuel. So as that happens, this is something that has affected the federal government. The Highway Trust Fund, the National Highway Trust Fund is in real trouble. And most state transportation infrastructure investment funds are in big trouble. So there's a national conversation about what comes next, and there's some different ideas out there, and I'm sure there will be a lot of conversation on this. But it starts with a recognition that things like mass transit, as well as highways and bridges, just have to be funded. We've got to figure out how to do this. If we don't, we are again hurting ourselves. These are investments that if we don't make, we're hurting our own future.
We have time for one more question, Governor Wolf. And I know you touched on this a little bit earlier on in the program, but let me ask it this way. With the events post-election and the culmination of what happened on January 6th, there is a sense that we are at war with each other, and we are suspicious of each other, and we are taking one side or the other when it comes to politics. And I'm sure you've thought about this a lot, because everyone has. People are really scared for our country. What do you think needs to happen to renew ourselves?
Well, yeah, I actually was at the inauguration last week, and it was a very sad sight for me. I'm a student of history. I really have this grew up with a great fascination and admiration for our system of government. And for me, I live in York County, so two hours from Washington. When I was a kid, you go on field trips to the Capitol and things like that. And it was a veritable temple of democracy. And there's just a real soulful feeling about that. And to go to the inauguration, which was very uplifting and a wonderful experience, but to look back, and it was a city under siege. There were 25,000 armed military folks there. And this was the United States of America. And to your point, that's not the way we should be doing things. And we should be able to argue and disagree with each other and recognize our common humanity, the sense that we have a lot more that unites us than actually divides us. And to the extent we allow the divisions, the disagreements to create all kinds of hardship and heartache and anger, that really doesn't help us get to the point where we got to make good policies that actually help people. To the extent that what happened on the 6th was a function of just a bunch of disaffection with the things that our government has done. I think, in a democracy, we've got to have the ability to register complaints and be able to say, yeah, we can do better, because as we know, we can do better. But the optics of what happened on the 6th really wasn't something that, and the aftermath was not something that I would necessarily be proud of taking a photograph and saying, look at my country.
Tom Wolf, Governor of Pennsylvania, thanks so much for your time. Happy New Year and best of luck.
Thank you very much, Matt. Appreciate it.
I'd like to also thank our sponsors, our title sponsors, 15 to Know, BB&T, which, as you now know, is Truist, and Stradley Ronan. Co-sponsors 6ABC, Independence Blue Cross, PICO, Supporting sponsors, African American Chamber of Commerce, General Building Contractors Association, Montgomery County Community College, Pfizer. Thanks to the Greater Philadelphia Chamber of Commerce. It's an honor to serve as your moderator this afternoon. Thanks to everyone who logged in. You are now free to go. Have a great week, everyone. I'll see you tomorrow morning on Action News.